Welcome to the Liberty Myself Emancipation Media Club. Today's reading is
Wild Apples by Henry David Thoreau.
This is part of our twice-daily content heartbeat designed to help build information autonomy in our algorithm-dominated world. Listen, reflect, and engage however works for you. Without further ado, let's jump in. Stay free.
Wild Apples by Henry David Thoreau. The history of the apple tree. It is remarkable how closely the history of the apple tree is connected with that of man. The geologist tells us that the order of the Rosaceae, which includes the apple, also the true grasses, and the Labiatae, or mints, were introduced only a short time previous to the appearance of man on the globe. It appears that apples made a part of the food of that unknown primitive people whose traces have lately been found at the bottom of the Swiss lakes, supposed to be older than the foundation of Rome, so old that they had no metallic implements. An entire black and shriveled crab apple has been recovered from their stores. Tacitus says of the ancient Germans that they satisfied their hunger with wild apples, among other things. Niebuhr observes that the words for a house, a field, a plow, plowing, wine, oil, milk, sheep, apples, and others relating to agriculture and the gentler ways of life, agree in Latin and Greek, while the Latin words for all objects pertaining to war or the chase are utterly alien from the Greek. Thus the apple tree may be considered a symbol of peace no less than the olive. The apple was early so important, and so generally distributed, that its name traced to its root in many languages signifies fruit in general. Mulanda omicron nu, melon, in Greek, means an apple, also the fruit of other trees. Also a sheep and any cattle, and finally riches in general. The apple tree has been celebrated by the Hebrews, Greeks, Romans, and Scandinavians. Some have thought that the first human pair were tempted by its fruit. Goddesses are fabled to have contended for it, dragons were set to watch it, and heroes were employed to pluck it. The tree is mentioned in at least 3 places in the Old Testament, and its fruit in 2 or 3 more. Solomon sings, "As the apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons." And again, "Stay me with flagons, comfort me with apples." The noblest part of man's noblest feature is named from this fruit, the apple of the eye. The apple tree is also mentioned by Homer and Herodotus. Ulysses saw in the glorious garden of Alcinous pears and pomegranates and apple trees bearing beautiful fruit. And according to Homer, apples were among the fruits which Tantalus could not pluck, the wind ever blowing their boughs away from him. Theophrastus knew and described the apple tree as a botanist. According to the Prose Edda, Iduna keeps in a box the apples which the gods, when they feel old age approaching, have only to taste of to become young again. It is in this manner that they will be kept in renovated youth until Ragnarok, or the destruction of the gods. I learned from Loudon that the ancient Welsh bards were rewarded for excelling in song by the token of the apple spray. And in the Highlands of Scotland the apple tree is the badge of the clan Lamont. The apple tree belongs chiefly to the northern temperate zone. Loudon says that it grows spontaneously in every part of Europe except the frigid zone, and throughout Western Asia, China, and Japan. We have also 2 or 3 varieties of the apple indigenous in North America. The cultivated apple tree was first introduced into this country by the earliest settlers, and is thought to do as well or better here than anywhere else. Probably some of the varieties which are now cultivated were first introduced into Britain by the Romans. Pliny, adopting the distinction of Theophrastus, says, "Of trees there are some which are altogether wild, some more civilized." Theophrastus includes the apple among the last, and, indeed, it is in this sense the most civilized of all trees. It is as harmless as a dove, as beautiful as a rose, and as valuable as flocks and herds. It has been longer cultivated than any other, and so is more humanized, and who knows but, like the dog, it will at length be no longer traceable to its wild original. It migrates with men, like the dog and horse and cow, first, perchance, from Greece to Italy, thence to England, thence to America, and our western emigrant is still marching steadily toward the setting sun with the seeds of the apple in his pocket, or perhaps a few young trees strapped to his load. At least 1 million apple trees are thus set farther westward this year than any cultivated ones grew last year. Consider how the blossom week, like the Sabbath, is thus annually spreading over the prairies, for when man migrates he carries with him not only his birds, quadrupeds, insects, vegetables, and his very sward, but his orchard also. The leaves and tender twigs are an agreeable food to many domestic animals, as the cow, horse, sheep, and goat, and the fruit is sought after by the first, as well as by the hog. Thus there appears to have existed a natural alliance between these animals and this tree from the first. The fruit of the crab in the forests of France is said to be a great resource for the wild boar. Not only the Indian, but many indigenous insects, birds, and quadrupeds, welcomed the apple tree to these shores. The tent caterpillar saddled her eggs on the very first twig that was formed, and it has since shared her affections with the wild cherry, and the cankerworm also in a measure abandoned the elm to feed on it. As it grew apace, the bluebird, robin, cherrybird, kingbird, and many more, came with haste and built their nests and warbled in its boughs, and so became orchard birds, and multiplied more than ever. It was an era in the history of their race. The downy woodpecker found such a savory morsel under its bark, that he perforated it in a ring quite round the tree before he left it. A thing which he had never done before, to my knowledge. It did not take the partridge long to find out how sweet its buds were, and every winter eve she flew, and still flies, from the wood, to pluck them, much to the farmer's sorrow. The rabbit, too, was not slow to learn the taste of its twigs and bark, and when the fruit was ripe, the squirrel half rolled, half carried it to his hole, and even the musquash crept up the bank from the brook at evening, and greedily devoured it, until he had worn a path in the grass there, and when it was frozen and thawed, the crow and the jay were glad to taste it occasionally. The owl crept into the first apple tree that became hollow, and fairly hooted with delight. Finding it just the place for him, so, settling down into it, he has remained there ever since. My theme being the wild apple, I will merely glance at some of the seasons in the annual growth of the cultivated apple, and pass on to my special province. The flowers of the apple are perhaps the most beautiful of any tree, so copious and so delicious to both sight and scent. The walker is frequently tempted to turn and linger near some more than usually handsome one, whose blossoms are 2/3 expanded. How superior it is in these respects to the pear, whose blossoms are neither colored nor fragrant. By the middle of July, green apples are so large as to remind us of coddling. And of the autumn. The sward is commonly strewed with little ones which fall stillborn, as it were, nature thus thinning them for us. The Roman writer Palladio said, if apples are inclined to fall before their time, a stone placed in a split root will retain them. Some such notion, still surviving, may account for some of the stones which we see placed to be overgrown in the forks of trees. They have a saying in Suffolk, England, at Michaelmas time, or a little before, half an apple goes to the core. Early apples begin to be ripe about the 1st of August, but I think that none of them are so good to eat as some to smell. One is worth more to scent your handkerchief with than any perfume which they sell in the shops. The fragrance of some fruits is not to be forgotten, along with that of flowers. Some gnarly apple which I pick up in the road reminds me by its fragrance of all the wealth of Pomona, carrying me forward to those days when they will be collected in golden and ruddy heaps in the orchards and about the cider mills. A week or two later, as you are going by orchards or gardens, especially in the evenings, you pass through a little region possessed by the fragrance of ripe apples, and thus enjoy them without price, and without robbing anybody. There is thus about all natural products a certain volatile and ethereal quality which represents their highest value, and which cannot be vulgarized or bought and sold. No mortal has ever enjoyed the perfect flavor of any fruit, and only the godlike among men begin to taste its ambrosial qualities. For nectar and ambrosia are only those fine flavors of every earthly fruit which our coarse palates fail to perceive, just as we occupy the heaven of the gods without knowing it. When I see a particularly mean man carrying a load of fair and fragrant early apples to market, I seem to see a contest going on between him and his horse, on the one side, and the apples on the other, and, to my mind, the apples always gain it. Pliny says that apples are the heaviest of all things, and that the oxen begin to sweat at the mere sight of a load of them. Our driver begins to lose his load the moment he tries to transport them to where they do not belong, that is, to any but the most beautiful. Though he gets out from time to time, and feels of them, and thinks they are all there, I see the stream of their evanescent and celestial qualities going to heaven from his cart, while the pulp and skin and core only are going to market. They are not apples, but pomace. Are not these still Iduna's apples, the taste of which keeps the gods forever young? And think you that they will let Loki or Thjasse carry them off to Jotunheim, while they grow wrinkled and grey? No, for Ragnarok, or the destruction of the gods, is not yet. There is another thinning of the fruit, commonly near the end of August or in September, when the ground is strewn with windfalls, and this happens especially when high winds occur after rain. In some orchards you may see fully 3/4 of the whole crop on the ground, lying in a circular form beneath the trees, yet hard and green, or, if it is a hillside, rolled far down the hill. However, it is an ill wind that blows nobody any good. All the country over, people are busy picking up the windfalls, and this will make them cheap for early apple pies. In October, the leaves falling, the apples are more distinct on the trees. I saw one year in a neighboring town some trees fuller of fruit than I remember to have ever seen before. Small yellow apples hanging over the road. The branches were gracefully drooping with their weight, like a barberry bush, so that the whole tree acquired a new character. Even the topmost branches, instead of standing erect, spread and drooped in all directions, and there were so many poles supporting the lower ones, that they looked like pictures of banyan trees. As an old English manuscript says, the mo appellin the tree bereth the more ski boweth to the folk. Surely the apple is the noblest of fruits. Let the most beautiful or the swiftest have it. That should be the going price of apples. Between the 5th and 20th of October I see the barrels lie under the trees. And perhaps I talk with one who is selecting some choice barrels to fulfill an order. He turns a specked one over many times before he leaves it out. If I were to tell what is passing in my mind, I should say that every one was specked which he had handled, for he rubs off all the bloom, and those fugacious ethereal qualities leave it. Cool evenings prompt the farmers to make haste, and at length I see only the ladders here and there left leaning against the trees. It would be well if we accepted these gifts with more joy and gratitude, and did not think it enough simply to put a fresh load of compost about the tree. Some old English customs are suggestive at least. I find them described chiefly in Brand's Popular Antiquities. It appears that on Christmas Eve the farmers and their men in Devonshire take a large bowl of cider. With a toast in it, and carrying it in state to the orchard, they salute the apple trees with much ceremony, in order to make them bear well the next season. This salutation consists in throwing some of the cider about the roots of the tree, placing bits of the toast on the branches, and then, encircling one of the best-bearing trees in the orchard, they drink the following toast several times. Here's to thee, old apple tree, whence thou mayst bud, and whence thou mayst blow, and whence thou mayst bear apples enow, hats full, caps full, bushel, sacks full, and my pockets full, too. Hoorah! Also what was called apple howling used to be practiced in various counties of England on New Year's Eve. A troop of boys visited the different orchards, and, encircling the apple trees, repeated the following words: stand fast, root. Bear well, top, pray God send us a good howling crop, every twig, apples big, every bough, apples enow. They then shout in chorus, one of the boys accompanying them on a cow's horn. During this ceremony they rap the trees with their sticks. This is called wassailing the trees, and is thought by some to be a relic of the heathen sacrifice to Pomona. Herrick sings, wassail the trees that they may bear, you many a plum and many a pear, for more or less fruits they will bring, as you so give them wassailing. Our poets have as yet a better right to sing of cider than of wine. But it behooves them to sing better than English Phillips did, else they will do no credit to their muse, the wild apple. So much for the more civilized apple trees, urbaniores, as Pliny calls them. I love better to go through the old orchards of ungrafted apple trees, at whatever season of the year, so irregularly planted, sometimes two trees standing close together, and the rows so devious that you would think that they not only had grown while the owner was sleeping, but had been set out by him in a somnambulic state. The rows of grafted fruit will never tempt me to wander amid them like these. But I now, alas, speak rather from memory than from any recent experience. Such ravages have been made. Some soils, like a rocky tract called the Easterbrookes country in my neighborhood, are so suited to the apple, that it will grow faster in them without any care, or if only the ground is broken up once a year, than it will in many places with any amount of care. The owners of this tract allow that the soil is excellent for fruit, but they say that it is so rocky that they have not patience to plow it, and that, together with the distance, is the reason why it is not cultivated. There are, or were recently, extensive orchards there standing without order. Nay, they spring up wild and bear well there in the midst of pines, birches, maples, and oaks. I am often surprised to see rising amid these trees the rounded tops of apple trees glowing with red or yellow fruit. In harmony with the autumnal tints of the forest, going up the side of a cliff about the 1st of November, I saw a vigorous young apple tree, which, planted by birds or cows, had shot up amid the rocks and open woods there, and had now much fruit on it, uninjured by the frosts, when all cultivated apples were gathered. It was a rank wild growth, with many green leaves on it still, and made an impression of thorniness. The fruit was hard and green, but looked as if it would be palatable in the winter. Some was dangling on the twigs, but more half buried in the wet leaves under the tree, or rolled far down the hill amid the rocks. The owner knows nothing of it. The day was not observed when it first blossomed, nor when it first bore fruit, unless by the chickadee. There was no dancing on the green beneath it in its honor, and now there is no hand to pluck its fruit, which is only gnawed by squirrels, as I perceive. It has done double duty, not only borne this crop, but each twig has grown a foot into the air. And this is such fruit. Bigger than many berries, we must admit, and carried home will be sound and palatable next spring. What care I for Iduna's apples so long as I can get these? When I go by this shrub thus late and hardy, and see its dangling fruit, I respect the tree, and I am grateful for nature's bounty, even though I cannot eat it. Here on this rugged and woody hillside has grown an apple tree. Not planted by men, no relic of a former orchard, but a natural growth, like the pines and oaks. Most fruits which we prize and use depend entirely on our care. Corn and grain, potatoes, peaches, melons, etc., depend altogether on our planting, but the apple emulates man's independence and enterprise. It is not simply carried, as I have said, but, like him, to some extent, it has migrated to this new world, and is even, here and there, making its way amid the aboriginal trees, just as the ox and dog and horse sometimes run wild and maintain themselves. Even the sourest and crabbedest apple, growing in the most unfavorable position, suggests such thoughts as these: it is so noble a fruit. The crab, nevertheless, our wild apple is wild only like myself, perchance, who belong not to the aboriginal race here, but have strayed into the woods from the cultivated stock. Wilder still, as I have said, there grows elsewhere in this country a native and aboriginal crabapple, whose nature has not yet been modified by cultivation. It is found from western New York to Minnesota and southward. Michaud says that its ordinary height is 15 or 18 feet, but it is sometimes found 25 or 30 feet high, and that the large ones exactly resemble the common apple tree. The flowers are white mingled with rose color, and are collected in corymbs. They are remarkable for their delicious odor. The fruit, according to him, is about 1.5 inches in diameter, and is intensely acid. Yet they make fine sweetmeats, and also cider of them. He concludes that if, on being cultivated, it does not yield new and palatable varieties, it will at least be celebrated for the beauty of its flowers, and for the sweetness of its perfume. I never saw the crabapple till May, 1861. I had heard of it through Michaud, but more modern botanists, so far as I know, have not treated it as of any peculiar importance. Thus it was a half-fabulous tree to me. I contemplated a pilgrimage to the Glades, a portion of Pennsylvania, where it was said to grow to perfection. I thought of sending to a nursery for it, but doubted if they had it, or would distinguish it from European varieties. At last I had occasion to go to Minnesota, and on entering Michigan I began to notice from the cars a tree with handsome rose-colored flowers. At first I thought it some variety of thorn, but it was not long before the truth flashed on me, that this was my long-sought crabapple. It was the prevailing flowering shrub or tree to be seen from the cars at that season of the year, about the middle of May. But the cars never stopped before one, and so I was launched on the bosom of the Mississippi without having touched one, experiencing the fate of Tantalus. On arriving at St. Anthony's Falls, I was sorry to be told that I was too far north for the crabapple. Nevertheless I succeeded in finding it about 8 miles west of the falls, touched it and smelled it, and secured a lingering corymb of flowers for my herbarium. This must have been near its northern limit. How the wild apple grows, but though these are indigenous, like the Indians, I doubt whether they are any hardier than those backwoodsmen among the apple trees, which, though descended from cultivated stocks, plant themselves in distant fields and forests, where the soil is favorable to them. I know of no trees which have more difficulties to contend with, and which more sturdily resist their foes. These are the ones whose story we have to tell. It oftentimes reads thus: near the beginning of May, we notice little thickets of apple trees just springing up in the pastures where cattle have been, as the rocky ones of our Easterbrooks country, or the top of Knobscot Hill in Sudbury. 1 or 2 of these perhaps survived the drought and other accidents, their very birthplace defending them against the encroaching grass and some other dangers. At first, in 2 years' time, T had thus reached the level of the rocks, admired the stretching world, nor feared the wandering flocks. But at this tender age, its sufferings began. There came a browsing ox, and cut it down a span. This time, perhaps, the ox does not notice it amid the grass, but the next year, when it has grown more stout, he recognizes it for a fellow emigrant from the old country, the flavor of whose leaves and twigs he well knows, and though at first he pauses to welcome it, and express his surprise, and gets for answer, "The same cause that brought you here brought me," he nevertheless browses it again, reflecting, it may be, that he has some title to it. Thus cut down annually, it does not despair, but, putting forth 2 short twigs for every one cut off, it spreads out low along the ground in the hollows or between the rocks, growing more stout and scrubby, until it forms, not a tree as yet, but a little pyramidal, stiff, twiggy mass, almost as solid and impenetrable as a rock. Some of the densest and most impenetrable clumps of bushes that I have ever seen, as well, on account of the closeness and stubbornness of their branches as of their thorns, have been these wild apple scrubs. They are more like the scrubby fir and black spruce on which you stand, and sometimes walk, on the tops of mountains, where cold is the demon they contend with, than anything else. No wonder they are prompted to grow thorns at last, to defend themselves against such foes. In their thorniness, however, there is no malice, only some malic acid, the rocky pastures of the tract I have referred to, for they maintain their ground best in a rocky field, are thickly sprinkled with these little tufts, reminding you often of some rigid gray mosses or lichens, and you see thousands of little trees just springing up between them, with the seed still attached to them, being regularly clipped all around each year by the cows. As a hedge with shears, they are often of a perfect conical or pyramidal form, from 1 to 4 feet high, and more or less sharp, as if trimmed by the gardener's art. In the pastures on Knobskid Hill and its spurs they make fine dark shadows when the sun is low. They are also an excellent covert from hawks for many small birds that roost and build in them. Whole flocks perch in them at night, and I have seen 3 robins' nests in one which was 6 feet in diameter. No doubt many of these are already old trees, if you reckon from the day they were planted, but infants still when you consider their development and the long life before them. I counted the annual rings of some which were just 1 foot high, and as wide as high, and found that they were about 12 years old, but quite sound and thrifty. They were so low that they were unnoticed by the walker, while many of their contemporaries from the nurseries were already bearing considerable crops. But what you gain in time is perhaps in this case, too, lost in power, that is, in the vigor of the tree. This is their pyramidal state. The cows continue to browse them thus for 20 years or more, keeping them down and compelling them to spread, until at last they are so broad that they become their own fence, when some interior shoot, which their foes cannot reach, darts upward with joy, for it has not forgotten its high calling, and bears its own peculiar fruit in triumph. Such are the tactics by which it finally defeats its bovine foes. Now, if you have watched the progress of a particular shrub, you will see that it is no longer a simple pyramid or cone, but out of its apex there rises a sprig or two, growing more lustily perchance than an orchard tree, since the plant now devotes the whole of its repressed energy to these upright parts. In a short time these become a small tree, an inverted pyramid resting on the apex of the other, so that the whole has now the form of a vast hourglass. The spreading bottom, having served its purpose, finally disappears, and the generous tree permits the now harmless cows to come in and stand in its shade, and rub against and redden its trunk, which has grown in spite of them, and even to taste a part of its fruit, and so disperse the seed. Thus the cows create their own shade and food, and the tree, its hourglass being inverted, lives a second life, as it were. It is an important question with some nowadays, whether you should trim young apple trees as high as your nose or as high as your eyes. The ox trims them up as high as he can reach, and that is about the right height, I think, in spite of wandering kine and other adverse circumstance. That despised shrub, valued only by small birds as a covert and shelter from hawks, has its blossom week at last, and in course of time its harvest. Sincere, though small, by the end of some October, when its leaves have fallen, I frequently see such a central sprig, whose progress I have watched, when I thought it had forgotten its destiny, as I had, bearing its first crop of small green or yellow or rosy fruit, which the cows cannot get it over the bushy and thorny hedge which surrounds it, and I make haste to taste the new and undescribed variety. We have all heard of the numerous varieties of fruit invented by Van Mons and Knight. This is the system of Van Cow, and she has invented far more and more memorable varieties than both of them. Through what hardships it may attain to bear a sweet fruit. Though somewhat small, it may prove equal, if not superior, in flavor to that which has grown in a garden, will perchance be all the sweeter and more palatable for the very difficulties it has had to contend with. Who knows but this chance wild fruit, planted by a cow or a bird on some remote and rocky hillside, where it is as yet unobserved by men, may be the choicest of all its kind, and foreign potentates shall hear of it, and royal society seek to propagate it, though the virtues of the perhaps truly crabbed owner of the soil may never be heard of, at least, beyond the limits of his village. It was thus the porter and the Baldwin grew. Every wild apple shrub excites our expectation thus, somewhat as every wild child. It is, perhaps, a prince in disguise. What a lesson to men! So are human beings, referred to the highest standard, the celestial fruit which they suggest and aspire to bear, browsed on by fate, and only the most persistent and strongest genius defends itself and prevails, sends a tender scion upward at last, and drops its perfect fruit on the ungrateful earth. Poets and philosophers and statesmen thus spring up in the country pastures, and outlast the hosts of unoriginal men. Such is always the pursuit of knowledge. The celestial fruits, the golden apples of the Hesperides, are ever guarded by a 100-headed dragon which never sleeps, so that it is an Herculean labor to pluck them. This is one and the most remarkable way in which the wild apple is propagated, but commonly it springs up at wide intervals in woods and swamps, and by the sides of roads, as the soil may suit it, and grows with comparative rapidity. Those which grow in dense woods are very tall and slender. I frequently pluck from these trees a perfectly mild and tamed fruit. As Pelagios says, and the ground is strewn with the fruit of an unbidden apple tree. It is an old notion that, if these wild trees do not bear a valuable fruit of their own, they are the best stocks by which to transmit to posterity the most highly prized qualities of others. However, I am not in search of stocks, but the wild fruit itself, whose fierce gust has suffered no iteneration. It is not my highest plot to plant the bergamot. How does wild apples encourage you to appreciate the resilience and uniqueness of nature's creations in your own environment?
This has been an EMC reading from Liberty Myself. To learn more about our project to create decentralized media alternatives, visit libertymyself.com. By creating Liberty Myself, we create liberty for all.